how many of you are teachers or were teachers? I see Barbara already put that in, but just would love just quickly to hear from the group. How many of you are in education? And it's totally fine if not, because we need as much help as we can get. But I'm just curious who are teachers. Great. We do have a lot of teachers, I figured. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And as people who work in the classroom, teachers, thank you for being here after school, after a long day of teaching. I'm seeing a lot. So I also mentioned that because if you are an educator, this program that I participated in this summer is an opportunity that you could take part of, as an educator in the United States. So the Fulbright program has specific programs for leaders and for educators. And so I did a program with the Fulbright scholarship, and I was with seven other US administrators in Singapore for 10 days. And the US government sends people to either Singapore, Finland, or the UK to study high performing schools. And they also have a program for teachers. So for education administrators, um, the program is 10 days, but for teachers, there are programs that are short term like this, but they're also like 6 month programs. And what was incredible about this is then the principals we met with who were in Singapore also came to the United States recently, the last 2 weeks, and they got to observe some of the schools in Brooklyn and in New Jersey, where one of the other Fulbright attendees were, and we got to show them our schools and get feedback from them, and now they're friends, and it's really this beautiful opportunity. And I want to highlight this also because the Fulbright program has been around since 1946, and their traditional program is giving 8 month stipends to people to study in different countries. And this is a form of what we call soft diplomacy. So when you send people abroad, and they build relationships, it fosters goodwill towards the United States. And just in the same way, it made me really proud to be from the United States. I learned a lot from Singapore and um, came back with such incredible ideas and got an appreciation for a very different culture than ours. But at the same time, it also made me really grateful about where I'm from. And so this is one of the things that is on the chopping block with the Trump administration and the Doge cuts. So there were huge cuts to the Fulbright program. They're trying to politicize the program. So in our group, there were seven of us. Four of us had voted for Kamala Harris. Three of us voted for Donald Trump. We talked very openly about politics, and even in that sense, it was a learning experience for me to hear from people who were outside of my Brooklyn, New York bubble and their reasons for voting the way they did. And so it's not politicized. You know, I do say that it's a pretty neutral program. But now the Trump administration is trying to politicize it. So this is another thing we need to fight for, a lesser known thing, but was really powerful program. So I encourage you all, if you are educators, to look into it. And I'd be happy to talk more about that as well. I shared my email at the beginning, but also happy to share my email at the end as well if you have questions about applying to the program. So when we think about what it takes to empower our students, I just would be curious in the chat, what is the number one factor that leads to higher student outcomes in school for students? There's a million things we can fix about schools, but what's the number one thing? See, in parent involvement, money, high expectations, relationships, representation, supportive adults, parents, relationships. Okay. So this is interesting. So research shows the number one factor that influences student outcomes is high quality teachers. And it's fascinating to me, even as so many of you are teachers, you're not naming yourselves as the number one thing that changes the trajectory of a child's life. And I mention this because so much of the discourse around education does not center teachers. And if we have strong teachers, if we have effective teachers, if we have well-rested, well cared for, excellent teachers, all those things will help our students. Now, that's not to say all the things that you're saying in the chat aren't true too. So, research also shows the other factors, and these are listed in order. So, the number one factor that will influence a student's outcome is teachers. The number two factor is high quality school leadership. So, the principal and the assistant principals. The other factors is teachers using high quality curriculum. That could be curriculum supplied by curriculum developers, or it could be curriculum created by teachers. So I don't mean that like you have to use a boxed curriculum. I just mean that you have to have high quality lessons. And that's where a lot of you mentioned engagement. And then, of course, parental involvement with the school. And then other societal factors, which is why I've gotten involved in politics as an educator, influence child's learning outcomes. So their income level, hunger level, community relationships and partners, all of those things, right? So so our teachers need to be valued. And one of the biggest takeaways that I saw in Singapore is teachers are loved, adored, and revered by society. And so we have to change the discourse in America around what we think about our teachers. Okay, another question. What are the two factors that lead, and someone already answered this correctly in the chat, that lead to attracting and retaining high performing teachers? It's two things that get people money. Yeah, there you go. Resources, pay, yes. Salary. Okay. So I heard someone say also, like, wow, what a concept in the chat. So a lot of things I'm going to say to you are just common sense policies. And I know, like, Julie and the team at Red, White, and Blue marketed this as innovative, and it is innovative, but there are also going to be a lot of policies that are just like, yeah, no kidding, right? And so we're going to talk about that. But I think we also have to remember that these things are possible. So the two number one factors based on research done by the National Association of Educators is to attract high quality teachers, it's salary. And then to retain high quality teachers, it's salary and ongoing support and development. And so knowing that you are growing in your job, knowing that you have a clear trajectory in your job, all of those things lead to retention. Now, I just wanted to pull a few stats to kind of put that into perspective. And I think my teachers will, really empathize with this, but those of you who are not educators, maybe this will be a little bit more surprising to you. But, the average teacher salary in the United States is $72,000. The highest paying states are New York, Massachusetts, and California. The starting salary in New York for a teacher is $79,000, and teachers can make upwards of six figures in the state of New York. But I also wanted to pull, because you might see those and say, yeah, that's pretty good. But I also just wanted to pull other careers. So the average salary at Meta, more commonly known as Facebook or Instagram, is $379,000 a year. That doesn't include like their stock options or other things. And the average salary at Goldman Sachs is $200,000 a year. And people at Goldman Sachs could make upwards of $600,000. So if you're living in New York City like myself, making $79,000 as a starting teacher salary and your peers are making these other salaries, that can be really, really troubling. And I see some people also putting in the chat, right? Our teachers can't afford to live in our communities. Teachers are underpaid. So one of the number one things we can do to continue to support teachers, it's often not in the political discourse, is teacher salary. We, like we in New York right now, we just elected a really progressive mayor. I'm very excited about him, but his number one education platform is about free daycare, and that's wonderful, and I'm super excited about that. But there's nothing in the education platform about teacher salary, and I think it's always a missing piece um, from the conversation around education policy. And even and I mentioned the New York City mayor-elect Zoran Mondami because I think he's a very strong candidate who cares about people, and it's still missing from his his policy and his discourse. So we have to constantly talk about this um, as a way to raise student achievement and raise student outcomes. So that is what I saw in Singapore. That elevating the teacher profession was a huge piece of the work that they do. And here are some of the ways that they really help to do that. So teacher training and certification while teachers are going to school, that is completely paid for by the government. So teachers do not need to pay to go to school. Um, they need to They get that completely paid for. Teachers in Singapore are also paid the market rate compared with other professions in Singapore. So what I mean by that is there were people who were former engineers teaching science to high school students, and they were paid what they would have been paid as an engineer. That does not happen for teachers in America. So if you were working at Meta and you want to teach cybersecurity or computer science at high school, you're not going to match that salary. You never will. You have to take a pay cut and go to $79,000, that starting salary. So you're never going to do that, unless you're like really willing to change that. But it doesn't incentivize people to go into the teaching profession. And so teachers were paid very well in Singapore and they were paid comparable to other professions. And that's why I put those comparison stats because people don't wake up in the morning really and say, you know what I really want to do? I really would love to open up a spreadsheet and work in finance for the rest of my life and change the world, right? I don't really think people always say that. Maybe there's a few, and I hope I'm not offending anyone in finance, but most people want to be teachers because they want to change the world, but they choose not to be teachers because they can't get paid. And so we have to start paying people. And I think that's really important. Um, Another thing that incentivizes people along this professional development place is teachers have the opportunity there, and every teacher. So, like here in the United States, right? Like I got this opportunity to go to Singapore. My job supported me going to Singapore because I'm a full-time employee with my school district because I'm an administrator. But not every American teacher has an opportunity like that. In Singapore, every single teacher has what they call learning journeys, and they get to pick trips that they want to go to, or they get to pick classes that they want to go to, that they're all paid for. And it's not just like a one day PD that like is at a museum, which we do have here in America, but they're like longer extended opportunities. And so, for example, teachers have the opportunity for like 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or even up to a year to I met a teacher who works at the Science Museum in Singapore, and she gets to spend her year developing lesson plans at that museum, and then she's going to go back to her school and work in her school. And we have sabbaticals in the United States, but you often have to teach for many years to do that. Not every school district does that. Um, and so that needs to happen in order for people to feel fulfilled and pushed and rejuvenated and develop those things. Um, and teachers are able to develop professional trainings while still working in the classroom. So what I mean by that is a lot of you have probably had as teachers have probably had professional development sessions from someone who's been out of the classroom for 10 years and isn't up to date with the current practices. And so what is really important is teachers in Singapore get to develop those practices alongside um, the professional development teams, and they're really connected to what they're doing. There are also different career pathways for teachers. So you get different levels of achievement. As a teacher, you're a master teacher, get different coaching opportunities. You get different levels of professional development. And so it doesn't feel like your only options are teacher and principal. There's a career trajectory, and that helps you feel like you're at different levels and reaching different achievements in your career. The other thing that I thought was very innovative was they research when teachers are most likely to quit. And then they give them bigger salary bumps during those years, making it more incentivized to not quit. So, for example, after the first year, it's really important. Like, the first year is really hard. And most people quit in the first year or after the fifth year. And so they give big salary bumps. To people, making sure they stay. And so those were all things that I thought were really innovative about the way that the pay structures were and the professional development structures were. Here are some pictures of what I was talking about. So this man who was a teacher, he was a former architect, and these were some of the projects he did with his students. This is an example of a problem statement. Kids were designing robots. They were in seventh grade, designing robots and having the robots figure out how to deliver food resources to other parts of the country. And because this teacher was a former engineer, was able to really help the kids design their own robots and do this kind of work. And so I think having people who have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise, time to develop their expertise really can make a difference for student outcomes. So, another thing that was really innovative was the way in which leadership is structured. So, we talked about the first thing, which is valuing teachers and making them feel like really honored professionals. And the second piece is responsive leadership. So, this was a bit controversial, I think, even for the people in Singapore. But something they do is the principals never stay to school longer than 4 years, they rotate. And what that means is the district decides that um, where the principals need to go where they are most needed, and what their skills and their talents are most needed. And it also means that principals don't stagnate. And so, since they're coming into a new school every 4 years, but the teachers have been there for a long time, also many of the principals said their whole first year was listening to teachers and listening to the school. And so they don't come in as like the expert and they're really leaning on the teachers to do things. Something else that was very interesting is that principals, teachers, and people in the Ministry of Education, which is similar to our departments of education or like our school boards, they spend time like switching jobs with one another. So almost like doing each other's roles. So like the principal will take 4 weeks and teach a teacher's class, or the teacher
Mm,
will be the principal for a few weeks, or the teacher will go and work on curriculum for the centralized education
mm,
office. And that is to make sure that nothing is stagnant. And so the people in the education office who are designing curriculum and designing teacher policy will also step into the classroom to remember what it's like to be a teacher. And like I'm sure many of you
yeah.
put it in the chat, like you have worked for a district who says we're going to implement this policy and they have no idea what it's like to teach and they're giving you an impossible situation to do. And so remembering what it's like at every level of the school is really critical and gives each other empathy. And like I see a lot of people talking about like collaboration. It fosters that kind of collaboration. Principals were also not allowed to really become principals unless they had reached the master levels of the teacher trajectory. And so there wasn't this sentiment, which I have felt as a teacher, that some of my principals couldn't do my job. There was not that sentiment at all. The principals were expert teachers who were really giving their teachers deep pedagogical experience and knowledge and sharing, and they were excellent teachers themselves. And so I think that also really elevates the profession. Something else that was happening that I thought was really powerful is high performing principals are identified and given assignments that benefit the entire district. So, for example, they have a holiday in Singapore called Racial Harmony Day, where all different diversity is celebrated, and some of the principals that one of the principals I worked with was really strong. And so he was in charge of organizing that day for every school in the district, not just for his own, and like integrating the different schools from the different neighborhoods. Another principal who was really high performing was in charge of mentoring all the principals in his district. So they're really kind of leveraging multiple schools to perform tasks. Um, Another thing that was really powerful was they recognized that teaching is hard. Teaching is not easy anywhere in the world. That was a commonality. And people love kids everywhere in the world. That was a beautiful commonality too. But they noticed they very quickly identify which teachers are experiencing burnout and which principals are experiencing burnout. And they put out in plans in place to make sure those teachers are supported. They take things off their plate, they do what they can to make sure they stay in the classrooms, and that they feel connected. And so I think that was really important too. There are wellness committees at every single school, and not just like, let's wish this person a happy birthday, but like wellness around like, are you taking care of yourself? Are you sleeping enough? Are you able to do PD? Are you able to participate in things? So a real strong connection about sustainability and teaching. These are schools. So if you look at these schools and like how high, well resourced they are, this first picture is a science school and they created like a Silicon Valley incubator and the kids do all kinds of tech projects and they like make it look like a tech office for them. And then another school, this is an elementary school class and they want to foster group work. So all the chairs, the kids are on wheels and they can wheel around the rooms. They can like do group work and meet with one another and connect. Um, and no one is under-resourced. So there are PTAs, but they're not doing fundraising. And yeah, I wanted the wheelie chairs too, Gold. So the wheelie, and they're just, kids have everything they need. So every child has an account with $4,000 in it for any education supplies that they need, that's provided by the government. Adults, every single adult in Singapore gets $500 every year to do continuing learning and education. So that could be for anything you want. And so that was just an incredible thing. And so there's none of this like fighting over resources or needing resources. Um, so the lowest income schools also receive the most resources. And so that is a huge difference because in the United States, the wealthiest schools receive the most resources because we pay for our schools through property taxes. So if you have, the most money, your schools are getting the most resources, and our lowest income schools are getting the least. And there is a communal understanding that if we are giving schools with low income schools money, that's not a detriment to my child who's wealthier. That is a beneficial thing for all of society because everyone who's well educated leads to less crime in society. Everyone who's well educated protects each other, takes care of each other. And so in that way, I mean, that's a very hard mentality to shift in America, but in that way it was really, really beautiful. That was the way they were thinking about resources. And like I mentioned, schools are all in clusters, similar to like our schools, where there's like superintendent districts and things like that. Um, and the schools are funded through a cluster, and so the resources are shared across the school cluster. Um, I do see some questions in the chat that I think are important, and I also want to share um, some context. So Singapore is much smaller than the United States, much, much smaller. So it's like the amount of people in Singapore is about the same as New York City. But I think, like, even though I don't want us to like think about those things as like limiting values around like what we can do here in the United States. And I know that it would be harder for us to do a lot of these things in the United States, but I don't want us to like really think about that as a detriment because poverty and inequality are policy choices. And high education and high outcomes for students are policy choices. And that's what I saw here in this country, that these were policy decisions. Education is the number one issue with sorry, the number three issue in terms of where they put their funding. It's not the top in the United States. The military is, right? So we can figure out how to make these shifts in the United States. We can share resources, we can do these things. And so I do want us to kind of keep that in mind, to keep that sense of possibility alive, even though we're a much bigger country, and there are, roadblocks to some of these things, but I think we can make these things possible. Um, Another thing that's really powerful that I think we need to have in all of our schools. Someone very early on said one of the things that helps students achieve is high expectations. Um, that's essential. Some of our students in America are not getting taught at an elite level. They're not getting taught by people who are always very serious about the content, right? And so we need to make sure that our teachers are highly, highly competent, and that our kids are held to very high expectations. And so one of the ways to do that is providing foundational curriculum materials to help teachers lesson plan. And so that was something I saw in Singapore was there was groups of teachers and groups of people in the Ministry of Education who were providing centralized curriculum, but teachers also had the autonomy to adjust those materials. So sometimes what happens in districts is people get high quality curriculum, but then they're forced to use it like a script. And that doesn't work because people need to adjust for their students. And then they're constantly changing what they have to do, and that's not effective. And so this was a really beautiful balance of we're going to provide teachers with excellent lesson plans and we're going to give them materials to use, but they can modify them, they can change them the way they need to. Um, and, adjust them. The other thing that was like really powerful is students are not training to take a test. So, but they outperform tests. So in the international PISA exam, which every student around the world takes, Singapore students score the highest every year. But their curriculum was not about test prep at all. Everything was about hands-on learning. Everything was about solving authentic problems. And I put, this is not the type of learning that just the gifted kids get. And I put gifted in quotes. And I put gifted in quotes because as a teacher, I believe every child is gifted. And we do a lot of we do a lot of fighting about gifted education, which is also a distraction because gifted education is hands-on learning. And it's learning differentiated to students' needs and experiential learning. And I believe every child should have that type of learning. Every child should be exposed to that type of pedagogy. It shouldn't just be a select group of kids. And so it's not about seeing which kids can get into the gifted program. It's about giving every child an opportunity to show their gifts. And that's what I saw in Singapore. And so what you see here in this picture, which was fascinating, is this students were creating robots to help feed senior citizens on their own, who were having trouble like learning how to eat by themselves or were struggling with that or people, and all these kinds of things. And so it was like incredible. These were 10th graders who were working on this project. And so this is also what I mean about high expectations. You have 7th graders designing robots and solving natural disasters. You have 10th graders also building these incredible robots. I don't have a picture of it, but there was art in the libraries that I think could have been in museums. And so the expectations of kids was just through the roof. And really doing it in a way that was powerful. And so what I mean by that too is character education and civic education was infused into all aspects of the curriculum. So it was about what are the problems in our community? Who do we want to help? Who do we want to support? What are problems we're facing globally? And how do we solve them? What kind of person do you want to be? And a lot of times, what I see in schools in the United States is like there's a character education class or a separate class around these things, and it's not all infused and interdisciplinary. And it builds student engagement when they see the interdisciplinary connections, and where all these things aligned. So I just, I know we want to leave some time for like questions and interview questions, but I do also want to talk about ways that I can support. So, upon returning from Singapore, I emailed people on city council that I work with and my state representatives, and I have meetings lined up with them to talk about some of these policy decisions and these policy choices. And so, I'm really excited that they are willing to listen, and want to hear some of these ideas and thinking about ways to support. So, if that's something you want to do, like you went to this talk, you want to talk to some of your local officials about what you're hearing tonight and you want me to help you kind of, have that meeting with them, I'd be happy to do that. Something else that I do a lot with teachers is like this idea of high quality training and professional trainings. So I would love to support you if that's something you want to bring to your school, and bring stronger professional development to your school around project-based learning and hands-on learning and what go deeper into what we learned in Singapore and how we bring it to your schools. Another thing is I have written history curriculum for grades 5 through 12. And my students have done very well on the New York Regents exams and the AP exams. And so that I share with people for free, because I don't believe that people should have to pay for curriculum. So if you need lesson plans or history curriculum and you want to connect with me about that, this is my email, and I'd be happy to talk with you about any of these things. Um, and I would love also if anyone is interested who's a teacher, if you would like to apply to this program, I would love for more people to participate and know about it. So I'm happy to also answer any questions about that. Like I mentioned, I got to go to Singapore, but other educators get to go to Finland or the United Kingdom or Singapore. So I think the more people that participate in these things and have these opportunities, the stronger we are as a country. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. And I know we have a few questions and then some time for Q&A at the end as well too.
So there were some questions in the chat about when folks were talking about salaries, someone had asked the question, and I just want to make sure everybody hears the answer. Is teacher salary a state or federal thing here in the United States? And it is very much definitely state, district to district, as a matter of fact, but yeah, state. Um, so someone asked if you thought that statewide standardized salaries might work. I know what somebody else answered in the chat, but just curious on your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the inequity we see in America is when we quote roll things back from to the states, and that goes back to enslavement, that goes back to school segregation, and so I think the more federal policies we have around education, the more we can strengthen things. So yeah, I think that is one way. I think also potentially if we can't get that to happen on a national level, states leading the way and showing that these programs work and then bringing them over to other states is another path of creating change. So, but I think overall there needs to be a commitment to that. And Senator Sanders was proposing an increase in teacher pay on a national level. It did not get where it needed to go, but there are people working for it. And so continuing to support those elected officials who are behind us is also important.
Well, I mean, but we did see, the big news today was that he's trying to destroy the Department of Education, though, federally. So I don't know, might be one of those things that's going to have to be, hold on to as much as we can for right now until we can make a change. One of the things that somebody brought up in the chat, though, that I thought was valuable was the fact that because it is a statewide thing or a state funded thing, it's also individual to district. And you talked about that as well. Wealthy districts have more, poorer districts have less. As long as we have this particular um, pay or cycle, set up, I think that's going to make it just a smidge tougher. um, Somebody asked a great question. What about special needs children in Singapore? Was there inclusion with them? How were they shuffled off to a different school? Were they mainstreamed? How did that look? What did that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I saw a lot of people asking about that too. Yeah, so very, very early on in kindergarten, they start working with students with individualized education plans. They don't call it IEPs, but for sake of our understanding, that's what it is. And the schools have more counselors than we do, like proportional to the students. So for every 9 students, there's a counselor. And so that was like also really powerful. So the counselors work with the kids, not just on emotional needs, but on also their special learning needs. One of the issues that they had, which was different than the United States, was because it's like a very competitive learning culture, one of the things that students struggled with a lot was like anxiety around school and mental health issues around not performing well in school. And so one of the things they were working on with their special needs students was making them feel included in the environment and making them feel that they were not less than because of that. They also have like different career pathways for students. So students can opt in to go to a middle school that's more career focused or like one that's more academic focused. However, it's not like in the United States where if you go to like vocational school, for example, you can't ever go to college because you've gone down this like, or like it's harder to go to college. I said you can go to college eventually, but like it's harder to go to college. You can still go back into college. And so it was a very supportive environment in terms of like choices for kids as well. Yes, Barbara said it better than me. Flexible tracking in the chat. Yes, and every 9 students was the counselors. So, and I think the other thing that was really powerful was just the kindergarten classes were very small and the older classes were stronger. So elementary school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, there were only 20 kids in a class. And then I was actually really surprised about this. There were 40 students in middle school and high school classes. And even in the high school classes, there were like upwards of 50 students and like lectures, and they had smaller groups. And class size didn't really influence their outcomes, and I was really surprised. So that was something that was interesting for me that kind of I didn't think
Do you
would.
think that's because of the different foundation that they start with the smaller classrooms and the different focus?
Yeah, I think that. And I also think like the pedagogical practices in the classroom with 40 kids were were stronger. So like they did like I saw a math class where even though it was 40 kids, they were all doing really powerful group work and the teacher had taught the kids to be leaders and
Mhm.
um had done it was really high engagement. So like you're not going to have as many classroom management issues if you have very high engaging lessons. And because it was more hands-on learning, you don't have as many classroom management issues. So I think that's why they could have the bigger class sizes. Yeah.
I'm curious about did you learn anything about attendance? Like I know as a HR director, getting employees to come to work every day is sometimes like herding cats. So, and I'm hearing from teachers that they're having the same issues, especially at the high school level and all. But what did you see there?
Yeah. So they faced similar issues with COVID that we did. So it was interesting and like some of the struggles they had around attendance during COVID were real. Um, I say this with a lot of respect and love for teachers, but there are some low performing teachers who I think during COVID, parents watched what their kids were doing on the screen and were like, this is really what my kid is learning. This is not high expectations. I don't need to send my kid to school. Like I can go on vacation whenever I want. I don't need to have them there every day if they're coloring in fifth grade. And unfortunately that does happen. And I think those teachers who have those low expectations need to be trained to have high expectations or counseled out of the profession. And we need to have people behind them who are better equipped to do the job. And there are many teachers who are outstanding, and those teachers need to be elevated and retained at all costs and not allowed to burn out. But I think part of it is like kids want to be in school. If you're gonna like do exciting things in school and you're gonna have excellent meals in school and you're gonna have time for social activities and you're gonna have all these things, you're not gonna have as much of those attendance issues because school is a place you want to be. And so it was yes and no. Like the pandemic disrupted everyone. Um, but then they were able to get more back on back on track. Yeah.
Do you think that our country is too big for education that works for the entire country?
Absolutely not. I am a teacher. I believe in change. I believe in the power of learning, and I don't think I will never, I will die trying. No, I think, yes, I think we have to believe that every child deserves that and that every child can achieve that. And I think it's going to be really hard work. I don't think it's going to be easy. But I do absolutely believe that we can achieve that. And I think one tangible thing that everyone can do tonight this week um, is start to have a different conversation with families and people that have their kids in school. So often we have this mentality that like my kid needs to go to the best school. And if your kid goes to the best school, then my kid's going to lose something. Where instead we should be having this conversation. If your kid is really smart and my kid's really smart, they're going to push each other in class. And if your kid has resources and my kid has resources, we're going to elevate everyone. And that's a conversation we can all start to have to shift our thinking around education because people are right. Like that's going to be hard to change in the United States, that mentality. Um, but we can all talk about that with parents and families and everyone in our lives.
What did parental involvement look like there?
Similar to the United States, and I think there was a different level of trust in the education system. I think what I have experienced is um, some of the parents I have worked with were harmed by the education system. In many low-income neighborhoods, the education system is oppressive and it's dangerous and it's harmful. And if that's your experience in school, you're not going to just automatically trust the teacher. And you're not going to show up and just listen to everything they say. They have to earn your trust. And because the education system isn't harming kids there, there's an automatic buy-in that doesn't exist here. With that said, I think that was similar and like strong in the United States is like we are both doing a lot of workshops around social emotional learning. We're doing a lot of workshops around how to support your children who have specialized learning needs or kids who are neurodivergent. There were a lot of workshops on that. There were a lot of celebrations of learning. I think we do a good job of that in the United States too. Um, Something that I did think that was a little bit different were they did have more around just like parent and student activities together that had nothing to do with student learning. So like it was like, come, we're gonna do yoga together with your kids, or like we're gonna bond and like read stories together with your kids, or we're gonna, and it wasn't about like report card conferences or other things like that. And part of
So
that,
really a fostering of community.
yes, and I think that also builds trust because it's like we're gonna come together as a community, we're just gonna do this fun thing together that helps us as parents, helps you, helps us as teachers, and then we
Mhm.
can have those harder conversations about academic performance and other places. Um, I don't want to perpetuate stereotypes, so I say there's a little nuance. But something they did talk about was like there is this Asian mentality because like the majority of people in Singapore are Chinese, Malaysian, or Indian, and like they're very intense with their kids about learning.
Mhm.
Um, and so they were actually doing a lot of parent workshops on how to be not so intense about learning and not so focused on test scores. And so that was like something I don't think we really have as much of in the United States. But that was also something they were working with parents of like learning for the sake of learning, not learning to just get a high grade or get into a competitive school or something of that nature. So that was a difference that I don't think we really have that problem here quite as much.
Someone asked about what did the school year look like? Do they go to school year round?
Yeah, so they were really funny about the weather. They're like Singapore is humid and then more humid. So the weather's the same all year. It's just really hot. And so the schools are all air conditioned and they go to school year round. And then they have like breaks in between. So like 3 or 4 week breaks, I think. I think it was twice a year. Yeah, so I think the kids are out of school for 6 weeks, but it wasn't all in the summer because there is no change in the weather.
Hmm. Hmm. What did you see that was a challenge there?
They were worried about kids being overly competitive with each other and like harming themselves as a result of that. They had to do a lot of work around mental health. Something that I think was powerful about the United States that they really valued about us is Singapore is also still an authoritarian country. So they have like these democratic socialist things, but you can't say anything negative about the government. And so when the principals came and saw our classrooms, they were like, wow, like your kids are really having powerful conversations with free speech and about politics, and like your teachers, are really pushing back and you're being truthful about our history. And they were like, never lose that. They were even fascinated with our group because um, like I mentioned earlier, we were politically divided and we would have
Mhm.
debrief conversations, and those debrief conversations got heated. And then the next day we would shake hands and hug each other. We still came together, and they were like, that's what makes America a beautiful place is your resilience, your ability to say what's on your mind, and your ability to hold on to that. So that made me really proud, was like that we challenge. They're like nervous about challenging systems.
Mhm.
And I think that's and getting their students to challenge systems. So um, we hold our First Amendment dear, and we should continue always because that was something they really admired about us.
Well, someone asked, and I think this is a valuable question, how do we attract the best and the brightest to be educators here when they're not compensated for being the best and the brightest? How do we, bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to fight for them to get paid. And I think that is like, a lot of, again, like laws are not focused on that. And I'll use New York as my example because New York is where I live. But they just passed a law to ban cell phones in New York schools.
Yeah,
And
I did that here.
yeah, and they just passed a law to lower the class sizes in New York schools. And neither one of those things are bad, but they're not solving the core problem of getting talented teachers in the class. And so if we know that that's about salary, we have to fight for laws to raise teacher salary. And people fought for laws to make class sizes smaller. And so we also then have to have conversations, I think, with, yeah, of course, there's like the Moms for Liberty groups and they're extremists, but we also just need to have conversations with regular people, like, and who are on our side and talk about changing their discourse around teaching. If I had $1 for every time someone said, "Oh, it must be so nice that you're a teacher, you get your summers off," I'd be a millionaire. And like what that speaks to is a lack of value of the profession in some ways because it's like they think my job is so easy and I'm so lucky I get the summer off, right? And it's like we have to remind people how hard it is to be a teacher and that we are valued and we should be compensated. So I'm just gonna that's gonna be the hill I die on that we just gotta fight for teacher pay. It's what attracts people into the fields. What I will say though, like once those teachers are in the door, there are some teachers who I see them and I observe them because now I'm coaching teachers and they bring tears to my eyes because they're so beautiful. And I'll go to the principal as the external coach and I'll say, what are you doing to keep that person? What are you doing to make them happy? What are you doing to make them feel like a queen, like or a king? Because this person is so special. And so sometimes when principals are so overwhelmed, they focus on all the problems. We also need to focus on who are those talented people that deserve attention, deserve praise, deserve external opportunities, deserve mentoring opportunities so that they stay. Um, and they know that they're loved and valued. And so I think that's a really important thing of we have some brilliant people already in the classroom who are just exceptional and they need to feel that. They need to know that they're not just ordinary.
Someone said that Singapore seems to be super competitive, and then they ask about Kumon, private lessons, cram schools, etc. Um, so I'm not really quite sure how they were phrasing that, but in my head, I was thinking, do they have those kinds of things there? Do they have the extra enrichment types of pieces, or everything that the kids learn is like during their school day? How
Everything's
long is their school day?
same as us. Yeah, like about like 8:30 to like 3:30. But everything's like a part of the day and they have moved away from those things. They said about 10 years ago it was more heavy on test prep. I think some of those things also came out of like South Korea, but they've moved away from that entirely. So they've even gotten rid of a lot of standardized tests and more of the hands-on learning and they're seeing much more
What
um
about music and sports?
yep, that's like all a part of the day. And yeah, art was also very much a part of the day. So I think they feel like they're stronger in STEM, but
Mhm.
they are doing a lot around the humanities, in that capacity too. But yeah, it comes with that hands-on learning. And then there were some schools that were specialized. So there were some schools that were like magnet schools that were focused on STEM, and then some like I went to an all-girls school that was focused on like visual arts, and so the kids were more focused on that and theater. And so it also could depend on the school. They did have homework. I saw someone put that in the chat. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what this means. It says, is it the model minority? Do you know what that means?
Oh yeah, like I mean that doesn't ex like the so in the United States we kind of refer to as like Chinese Americans and Asian Americans as like the ideal minority, and sometimes people
Oh,
point to them as like they've overcome so many hurdles and they're still immigrants and it's part of American racism, right? Like if Chinese American immigrants could achieve so much in the United States, why can't everybody else? So it's often used. That's not there because like every country I often say has like its own caste systems that are created. Like racism is as a construct, and yes, racism has existed in his country for hundreds of years, but it's still a construct. And so our construct of race is different than theirs. So there isn't that level. There also was very concerted efforts to break down differences. So the Malaysian people were in the minority in Singapore, and so there was a lot of work done to integrate the schools to make sure that deliberately that kids had celebrations together. They would do like after school activities with different schools. I think that's another thing we could do in the United States. We have segregated districts, but our after school programming could be cross racial lines. That could be an easier way to start to desegregate. So that was like what they were doing, a lot of intentional integration.
somebody wrote our school year was initially set up around an agricultural schedule. So yes, that's true. Kids need a summer off to help on the farm. So shouldn't that have changed as technology changed?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know. I wouldn't be opposed to a year-long school year at all and like changing it so there's less breaks. I always found like January and February to be my best months teaching because there was the least days off and kids thrive on consistency. So I wouldn't mind like restructuring the schedule so they had, like longer 3-week breaks in between and went to school all year. Um, I'll just keep going back to it. I still think the number one things that need to be fixed are teachers, principals, and high quality curriculum and education for kids. And so like I don't know that the school year, changing the school year would be my number one thing that I would fix. I would
Mhm.
go for the other things first.
What about seniors? And I don't mean 12th graders, I mean senior citizens like me. What about seniors in the schools? Did they participate?
Um, you mean like did they go to
Yeah, I mean, did they help out or did they have a role?
oh
Or was it just specifically the teachers and the principals and
yeah,
how did the community interact with the schools, I guess, is
great
based.
question. Yeah. I didn't see that aspect of it, so I don't know. I can't really speak to that.
Hmm.
But I do know, like, they did say that they also have a very low homelessness population in Singapore, because the government provides housing, and like 80% of Singaporeans live in government funded housing, and they live with their families. So a lot of the people who were homeless was because they were fighting with their families. And so I think there is like this idea of taking care of, and extended family live together too. So it was like grandparents and seniors living with the family. But we didn't see, it doesn't mean it's not happening, but we didn't see that. So I don't know.
Is there anything that you want to share with us? Any piece that um, anything else that you want to share with us that you saw there or that you thought was novel or that would be good here?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I want to impart on people is just that when I went to Singapore, I realized like how much in the United States we can change things through policy and through politics and through effective teaching practices. And I can't change everything myself, but I can change a lot. And I have changed a lot now, even in my own practice. And so, what I want people to remember is that even though it seems really hard, and Donald Trump is dismantling the Department of Education as we speak, like if we still fight for positive change and we still have high expectations of what we want, right? It's not enough to say, let's bring back the banned books. No, we have to have the high expectations and we want every child to have hands-on learning. We want every child to have access to every book, every library, right? It's not enough to just reverse their negative policies. We have to aspire for the best. And so I hope that like tonight shows you what some of the best are doing, and that we have to always have a sense of possibility.
Yeah, I agree.
Honestly, I was trying to think of what I wanted to say to end this, and I was like, I don't think I can do that then better than what Jillian just said. So I know it seems impossible sometimes in the United States, but that's why we're all here because we're fighting for those things, and we need these goals and these possibilities and the things to push our elected officials to do. So, thank you for those insights, Jillian. We really appreciate it. I'm sorry, guys. I had a power outage. I am sitting literally in the dark. I have a Zoom light on, and that's it. So, um, good luck for me. I guess I'm going to bed soon. So. Jillian, thank you so much, as always, for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And I'm really glad you got this experience and you got to share it with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes, and I mean it. Please reach out, folks, and happy to partner with you. And thank you for spending your time with me. And thank you, Julie and Julie, for always doing these best events and providing this beautiful community for all of us to connect. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jillian, and everybody have a really great evening.
Good night.
Bye.
Everyone.